Hello, and welcome to the Primal Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Braden, and here we insights into the real science so that you can parent based on your God-given instinct and apply that innate knowledge to the modern world. And that is no small feat because society and culture and commercial interests are kind of set up to sabotage the primal baseline care that young children especially, require in the early years. And so we are here to help you get the real information and avoid the sabotage that gets in the way of optimal care for your child. There are 5 baselines that we will cover in all the episodes. Each episode will give you insight into one of the 5 major baselines that are biologically ingrained or wired in, biologically engineered or created by God. If you think of it that way, I do. But these are how we're made as human beings to be cared for in the younger years. We'll also touch on these 5 in adolescence because adolescence is also a very critical in terms of brain growth and child development. And so we're going to give you insights to apply to raising the healthiest child at every developmental stage, with an emphasis on the first 5 years of life, especially the first 3 years of life, because that is what my book, Primal Parenting, is. And this is a way for readers of the book to get more inside depth and to constantly update the scientific insights and expertise that we can apply to the modern world in those 5 baselines. And so they are, number 1, it's the relationship, the companionship and attunement with the parent. And at first, that's the mother. And in the very early stages, and of course, both parents are very important. And then the second baseline is nutrition, and that is breastfeeding at first. And we will explore the barriers to optimal breastfeeding and what's scientifically supported and what's actually normal, and just filter right out all of the cultural and commercial interests in that topic. The third baseline is touch. Physical touch is like fuel, and people are deprived in our modern society of touch, and especially children. And then there's the issue of negative touch. Is spanking okay, for example? And we'll get into how touch is fueling brain growth in the early years and what types of physical touch are needed, how important affection is in building the brain and building the healthiest social and emotional little human being. The fourth is community. Community is so important for all the other baselines to be possible, and to raise thriving children in the modern world, we must create our community. And so we'll be exploring ways to do that at every stage of development for the child. And the fifth is play. Play is an essential baseline for optimal development and thriving. So we will be integrating the science of play at every developmental stage throughout this podcast. So welcome. If you are confused by all the conflicting advice in the parenting space, you're in the right place. And we're going to equip you to parent with your instincts and honor the biological baselines that human beings are built to be raised with so that you can have a thriving child. That is your human right and your child's birthright. And today I'm so honored to be able to speak with and bring to you, our audience, our listeners, Dr. Darcia Narvaez, a professor of psychology at the University of Notre Dame. She is an award-winning author, an award-winning psychologist. She is the author of a book called The Neurobiology and the Development of Human Morality, but it's really the seminal textbook, so this is what PhD students are studying, on how children develop morally, which is kind of a loaded word that makes us think of religion. But morality, as Darcia will explain, is really more to do with emotional and social development, which happens in the very early years of life. So we'll get some insights into what sets children up for the optimal social and emotional development through Darcia's extensive research in multidisciplinary fields. So from biology to neurology to anthropology and animal studies. There are truths to be uncovered here. It's not easy for us parents to decipher all the conflicting parenting information, and we really have to have such a strong knowledge base of what really is good for children. And that is exactly what Dr. Narvaez brings to the world. She is a fellow in the American Association for the Advancement of Science. She's been recognized for her distinguished contributions to many scientific journals, and she is considered a top thought leader in the area of social, emotional, or moral development, which she'll explain more the scope of that. She was in a 2020 independent analysis of the top scientists worldwide. Darcia Narvaez was named to be in the top 2% of scientists worldwide. She's written a new book that we'll talk about, a beautiful book, more for the lay person audience, so for mainstream parents like you and me. And it's called Evolved Nest. And this is how she describes what all of her work has illuminated. For all of her studies have illuminated this sort of nest that children are meant to be raised in. And so the book just beautifully compares other social mammals, because that's what we are as human beings, to and looks at, what kind of parenting practices are they doing to raise optimal, normal social mammal people in our case, but we are all social mammals, and there are very distinct requirements for early care. And this book, actually her academic book, was awarded a very prestigious award at the Political Academy of Sciences in Vatican City. Her work was also awarded the William James Award from the American Psychological Association. Welcome, Darcia.
Hey, thank you. So good to see you, Angela.
Thank you. And one of the things that I think that is so unique about you, about your career, is that you have blended so many different scientific fields in coming to your recommendations about child rearing and what you refer to as the evolved nest. I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about which fields you drew from and why they're so informative to how we should raise our children in the best way for their development.
Well, I can pick out a couple of them so I don't go on and on. One is anthropology, ethology. Actually, evolutionary systems also. We've been around for 2 million years, depending on how you count our species origins, or 300,000 years ago. And most of that time, we lived in cooperative bands, providing companionship to everyone. And it's only in the last part of 1% of our existence that we got into these weird ways of being, what I call a cycle of competitive detachment. So looking at anthropology, they've, summarized what are the common practices we see for living and for raising children all over the world, the same kinds of things. And that's the evolved nest, right, which we can get into. So that was helpful. And then one of them said, well, this has been around for a while, these practices. I wonder if we should be paying attention to them for well-being,
Yes. So for anthropology, you mean the study of human history, how we evolved, correct?
Anthropology, ethnography would be where you go and you study and live and observe a particular group. So ethnography is more specific. Anthropology has branches and they look at evolution as well. And then I found neuroscience and how, early life experience actually engraves your brain. It's not just a working model of attachment that cognitively apply everywhere you go. No, it's actually affecting your reactions, your perceptions, your abilities. And so I was starting to integrate those pieces and then finding indigenous ways of being around the world, following the old ancestral wisdom of how to raise children and how to live cooperatively with one another. So it's just been a gradual integration across multiple fields.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And it's really helpful for us to have this guidepost of looking at, no, there's a reason for attachment. It's not just an arbitrary style that some parents want to do and some parents don't. There's actual science behind why this is, like you said, helpful for developing brain. And yeah, I definitely want to get into more of that. But you mentioned also ethology. So could you say a little bit about how other social mammals inform how perhaps parents should also take care of their children?
Right. Ethology has to do with how animals live and I mean, we're animals too, outlive their lives and, the course of the lifespan and so on. And our evolved nest is very much like other animals' nests. And so a recent book on the evolved nest points this out and spends a chapter on different animals. And social mammals are the most alike us. We pretty much share all our parenting practices with them. They've been around at least 30 million years. Other practices, though, really go back 70 million years. We share many practices, and it kind of humbles you, right? It's like, I guess
Yes.
humans aren't the greatest in the world and smartest and know everything. These other people, these other persons that are non-human know too.
And in some ways, animals are doing better than modern humans, right? In raising
Yes.
children well.
Yes, that's a good point. They don't torture their young. They don't intentionally abandon them or leave them to cry or in distress. They are nurturing, and they keep that, as a ongoing way of raising. Why would you do otherwise? You're going to have a dysregulated, uncooperative member of the species. Why would you do that to anybody? So,
Yes, and maybe say a little bit about the neuroscience, how that affects what you just described. How does treating children, putting them under a lot of distress and not giving them the nurturing that they need, how does that translate into what you just described
right.
neurologically?
Yeah. And so when infant, so I call babies 0 to 3 or 4. Boys mature more slowly and take more nurturing. So we need to expand the window for when you become more mature. And when you distress, especially a young baby, where they're just starting to get to know the world outside the womb, you're going to encourage their brain to be in a state of distress, which means cortisol is flowing. And when that stays, and that's inflammation, it's inflammation to try to, usually you're sick and you have inflammation to try to calm you down with the white blood cells and so on. But if it's social distress, there's no infection. It's the whole context of being unsupported, of being alone, of being in distress, and nobody cares is the feeling of the baby, right?
We're talking about scenarios where parents are told to leave them alone to cry for sleep training and that sort of thing, right?
That's right. Yeah. So or birth experience is trauma, not, rushing the baby along. The baby should be deciding their own birthday. Fetuses vary by how long they stay in the womb by 55 days. So due dates are guesses. And then the medical field wants to pull out the baby in 26 hours,
Yes,
speed
they do.
labor along. And then that distresses the fetus. One of the top causes of infant mortality is infant distress, but you're pumping in Pitocin, right, to speed things along, and that then leads to more distress. And then they have to go into do a surgery, major surgery, cesareans, right? So there's all
Yes,
sorts of
yes.
places along the way of that child's development, even in the womb, if the mother's too distressed, not feeling socially supported, the baby's biochemistry in which they're growing can cause their brain then to develop a threat reactive, stress reactive brain. So this is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal gland axis, HP axis, that then can be enhanced to be easily triggered from prenatally, can happen at birth. It can happen then when you practice sleep training on a young baby. You're now, leaving them alone to just be in cortisol and inflammation forever, for a long time. For them, it's forever.
Yeah.
You've now seeded ill health for probably the long term.
Yes, and you used the word torture earlier, and I just want our parents to know that this is not hyperbole. This is, I believe we've seen through our work together in writing and researching, we even saw MRI reports of how the brain looks. For example, I don't know if there are for cry it out experiences for babies, but we definitely saw some for circumcisions. Can you speak to those experiences?
Yeah, so circumcision is torture, and the pain relievers supposedly that are used don't always work, and putting baby under anesthesia is quite dangerous and unhelpful. And one of the first experiences the baby's experiencing is, pain and sex arousal at the same time. It's really insane. So there's other ways to welcome babies to the community. So, originally circumcision was just a tiny snip, and then they decided some 2,000 years ago to make it the whole foreskin, and that's quite dramatic compared to a snip. But yeah, so the long-term effects, you're going to be more pain sensitive with infant circumcision. You're distressed, psychological distress from it, physiological problems with sexual function later, grows later, but that's not what the advocates will tell you because it's built into the system, making money. It's quite distressing to anybody who cares about babies' well-being to think that we're doing these things that really are, in my view, torture to a child, an infant who doesn't know any better. They just feel their feelings. And
They're just in pain, excruciating pain, and with no one there to comfort them. And
right.
it's trauma.
Yeah, it's trauma. And then
Yeah,
I
I
wonder,
noticed.
where's the trauma coming from, right? It comes from those first 3 years where you don't have a conscious memory of what happened. The Nazis knew that that was a good time to break the spirit of a child because they would then be conformists later. You threaten them and then they're, oh yes, I'll do whatever you want, because their brain systems are just kicking in and they freeze, right? Or they,
Wow. So the trauma response is kind of imprinted for life then.
yeah, yes, into personality, right? So then you're more easily threatened, or easily put into compliance, appease others, right? Rather than speaking up and being your own self. You don't really grow your own spirit, your own uniqueness, because you've been in this threat mode, and that's a different biochemistry. It doesn't grow the good stuff. It grows your protectionism.
That's how it feels to us parents as well. Like I've talked to so many moms in my coaching, and I personally experienced myself when we always kind of knew circumcision was a thing, but when it comes down to actually doing it and you're faced with like, okay, now I'm going to send my baby off to be tortured this way, to be mutilated, this really invasive, painful experience. I remember feeling very sort of paralyzed with fear. And then it's so just downplayed, like, oh, everyone does it, it's fine. But this is a perfect example of what I want parents to understand is that listen to your heart, listen to your instincts, because they're there for a reason. And if you're feeling anything along the way, whether it's circumcision or any of these things that society throws at us, if it feels wrong to you, pay attention to that, because it probably is the way it looks or feels to you, right?
Yeah. And I've heard from parents that say that the baby was taken away right after birth and circumcised away from them and then brought back and just in a terrible state, even bloody and such. I mean, they were shocked. What did we do? So just avoid that, the shock of the parents, the moral injury that you now feel like you are responsible for having damaged your child because they didn't give you a good enough informed consent.
Right. There's no informed consent. There's just, this is what you do.
Yeah, so it's unethical. So that gets us to morality, right? So all this stuff affects morality and then what adults think is moral or ethical.
Yeah.
And when you're very threat reactive, your brain doesn't think very well. The blood flow is going to running away, to your muscles so you can run or fight, and then if that doesn't work, you just freeze and shut down to stay alive. So if you leave a baby to cry, you are now putting them in the mobilizing state for a while until their body says, well, if we keep this up, we're going to die. So just shut down. And then they practice that. They practice because you've set up the condition for them to practice being like this and then and so then morality,
Yeah.
the way they act with others is they're not going to be very trusting because boy, people didn't help me. They're not going to trust their own self because I cried and nobody came. And then they're going to be very, oriented to self-protection and everything. They can't think because the mind closes, the heart closes.
Mhm.
And then you've got these very angry, threat reactive adults that can't cooperate very well and they want their own way because that's the only thing that makes them feel safe is some scripted way of being because they never felt safe here and never learned to be self-confident. And then they have to find something that helps them feel confident.
Yes. And just so you know, the audience, Darcia is considered, I think it's safe to say, the foremost expert on moral development. And so really your life's work and perhaps one of your greatest expertise is in how morality develops. Can you say a little more about the connection between what you just described, the reactive self-preservation approach to the world, and how that translates into morality?
Yeah, so I would correct you by saying I'm known for having integrated neurobiological development with morality. So
Her,
that so
yeah.
that's the thing that's unique about my work is trying to integrate across fields. So it's also, clinical and neuroscience, developmental science, educational science, all that stuff I
Amazing.
integrate. Yeah.
That's what it really is. People think of it as religion or, being well disciplined, but it's really so much deeper than that, right?
That's right. It's like our human nature. How will you grow your human nature? Do you want to provide a biology of love, of nurturing, and so that person's own biology is one of loving and openness and compassion, which is our heritage, which the evolved nest just naturally promotes, or do you want to provide a fearful environment and foster a biology of fear in that individual? And that's what we've done, almost accidentally in the industrialized world. We don't know what we're doing because of these ideologies that adults have, like, oh, you're going to spoil the child if you pick them up, or oh, you got to let them cry, it's good for them, all these myths. And then that's an experiment that creates the biology of fear. Biology of fear, then you're bracing against life. You're not going to be compassionate. You're going to want domination because that's all the thing you feel safe with, right? So you're a loser if you're not dominant. And oh my God, you're going to die, like that feeling when you were a baby left alone. You don't want to feel that feeling, right? Unless you go to therapy and they help you through it. And then you realize, oh, there's freedom on that other side. But when those things, when it kicks in, when threat reactivity kicks in, you lose your free will. You are going to use whatever script you were brought up to use, and you're going to use your older parts of the brain, which are you're born with, because they got enhanced, the survival systems to fight, to be angry, to be afraid or panic, and those are going to drive your behavior. Whereas if when you're provided the evolved nest, you grow after birth, all these skills, so many skills for getting along with others and reading their facial expressions and their gestures and knowing, what they're thinking and mind reading. This is all stuff that's different from chimpanzees. We evolved away from the chimpanzee hierarchy and dominance to being egalitarian and sharing and being generous. But when you don't provide the evolved nest, when you distress babies with sleep training, you leave them alone to cry, you leave them alone to sleep, you are now creating a chimpanzee.
It's so informative. That's really amazing because I do think there's a lot of rhetoric in the parenting information space about comparing us to other primates that are more hierarchical and not equal, and in many ways not as evolved as we should be, but we're de-evolving, if that's a word, by the practices that we're inflicting on children. And I heard you say, I believe it was in your film Breaking the Cycle, you have a beautiful short film which we'll link below, called Breaking the Cycle: Reclaiming Our Humanity with the Evolved Nest, that you refer to as these caregiving practices. And I believe that you said people have to be, you mentioned the detachment culture, and that's something that I'm very passionate about, pushing more attachment, human attachment. That's our birthright. But you said that people have to be traumatized into a detachment culture. I thought that was so profound.
Yeah. So you're providing trauma to the baby and then multiple traumas. I mean, there's this way, if the baby has a terrible birth experience, placing the baby or letting the baby crawl up the belly of the mother and then start the milk production, right, with massaging the nipples. They do that. It's just so amazing. But if you let the baby and mom have skin-to-skin contact after maybe a difficult birth, they can calm each other down. Their stress hormones are there to help them get through the process, and there's this flow of back and forth of oxytocin, endorphins, and whatever they need back and forth. And that magic hour or two after birth is when they help each other get that oxytocin flow going and help each other calm down. And so there's a way to de-traumatize, right? And then ongoing skin to skin contact after birth. And so you get that child back into bonding and being calm and feeling connected. So important to feel connected the whole time. All of us should be feeling that way throughout life, and especially babies when their brains are growing so rapidly around experience. So the trauma that we do, we've got so many layers of it now. The birth experience that's rushed along and drugged, and the baby doesn't get rid of the drugs for weeks. They don't have the capacity. And then they end up crying when they're awake and sleeping most of the time. And that people think, oh, the baby, it doesn't matter what you do to babies because it's just the way they are. Not a natural birth baby.
Right. So if you don't want the baby that's crying all the time and won't sleep, then try to have a natural birth. Would that be a good?
Yeah, and they know this in Europe. They have midwives that help with birthing, but here in the States, it's medical men have taken over and they want to make money, right, and be efficient about it. And so they'll just start the women on Pitocin, even though their baby maybe wants to stay in the womb longer, so their lungs develop properly. And so you end up with all these babies born too soon.
Absolutely. It happens all the time. All the time. And then they come in and say, oh, your baby's under distress. The heart's under distress. We have to do a C-section.
Right.
And like it's a big surprise, right?
Right. Yeah. So there's trauma there. There's trauma when you leave the baby alone at all. You're already, instituting this sense of I'm not safe, right? They need to feel connected and safe. They need practice learning how to breathe. They don't know how to breathe in the womb, right? They need to listen to your heartbeat, skin to skin, so their heart and their breathing matches yours. And they, sometimes babies who aren't slept with will die at night because there's nobody there to wake them up to breathe. Because moms have reported there's the beds sharing safely with their baby, and they wake up suddenly realizing the baby's not breathing and the baby's turning blue, and then they'll wake up. So
yes,
coaching. They need a lot of coaching.
Yes, the mothers, the breastfeeding mothers, James McKenna, right, that did a lot of research on the awareness
Right.
that breastfeeding mothers have about their babies breathing and their babies, if they're well or not, we can sense it in our sleep.
That's right. Yeah, and you can safely bed share when you're breastfeeding. That's just what is normal. Of course, you have to know what a safe space is. So
Yes.
go to his website, cosleeping.nd.edu.
He is the authority. If
Yeah.
you're confused about bed sharing and you want to do it safely, definitely we'll put Dr. James McKenna's information there.
Yeah.
Yes. And so with your film, Breaking the Cycle, we'll link that too. And it's just so beautifully lays out this vision of what humanity can be, what humanity is supposed to be, how we're supposed to support and cooperate with each other. And we have to understand that we have to raise children in a specific way in order to realize that vision.
Yeah, it's a community child raising. We evolved to do that. It's a village that takes care of the young. So it's not just a mother only thing. Even breastfeeding is often shared in some communities. And then carrying, pretty much 24/7 carrying of the young child. But of course, you allow them to crawl around and develop all their muscles and joints and everything, and their balance and play. That's something everybody plays, and delights one another within our ancestral context. This is the way we lived. Responsive care, so whatever needs you have are met, and you're not in distress. Nobody's in distress on average, unless a tree falls on them or something. But there's just a deep cooperation because they are allowing all those skills to develop early on that we would develop if we provided the evolved nest. But we don't. We isolate people a lot. And so you don't learn all that social and emotional intelligence that is part of our heritage. That's one thing that's different about human beings.
Yes. And also, like you have in your Evolved Nest book, that is also very similar across social mammals, right? Do you have any specific stories that are special or moving about the animals? Because I know each chapter focuses on an animal and their nurturing. What are some of the top lessons that the audience could find in your book about animals?
Yeah, well, I like the elephant one particularly because the they're surrounded by older siblings, aunties, the mother's having the youngster, and everyone will come in as soon as the youngster's out and touch the youngster as a welcome, and then they're together. They just move around the landscape with the young one there in the middle, and they're all moving together. And I think that's something that we think, oh, that's not possible for human beings, oh, that's romantic. No, but that's how we evolved to move with nature, to move in cooperation with one another, not against. We think that's, it's either being communal or it's being individualistic and doing your own thing. No, in our ancestral context, you do your own thing in cooperation with the community. You unfold your beauty in cooperation with others. It's not an either or. So I
Yeah.
really like the elephants. I like the beavers who are hard workers, but they're building dams and lodges and feeding other animals over winter. They let muskrats come in and eat with them and such. But they also play. They're also, doing little somersaults in the water and stuff like that. So that was our play chapter.
And what about the neurobiology, or how we are wired for play, and how stress, especially early trauma, dampens that ability to play? Or how does stress affect play?
Yeah, and this is another source of my integrating information was Jaak Panksepp's work on play and effective neuroscience and the animal studies that have shown how important play is. And play is an indicator that the youngster is feeling safe and well. And when they don't play, that means they don't feel safe or they're not feeling well, right? On
Yeah.
average, that's at least because kids just want to go play. And it's something that helps build social intelligence. You learn to control your aggressive urges, because if you get too aggressive with your playmate, and you can see this with when puppies are playing or kittens, that one of them will go when the other one bites too hard, and then
Yeah.
you have to pull back as a playmate, or else the playmate will stop playing with you. So you
And you
have
don't
to
want
learn.
that.
Yeah.
Yes, that's so beautiful. And I think that also speaks to the role of fathers somewhat too, because fathers are the ones who do that rough play more so perhaps than mothers do. It seems to be part of the father's instinct to play that way. And maybe give us a couple examples of how that translates in the research, because everything Darcia is saying is based on research and science, and so these aren't just opinions, they're based on research. So what would you say about the research of fathers rough play and how that translates into boys who have better discipline, self-control? Or
Yeah, there's a set of studies that have shown that when fathers play with the youngsters, and I'm not sure how old that goes to, maybe 10 or 11 or 12, but playing with them, it's important for the father to actually win at first, because
oh,
it actually makes the child feel more safe. And if you let the child win in the wrestling match or whatever, it's not as helpful in this research
interesting.
anyway. Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
It makes perfect sense though, like you want to know that your protector is strong, right? Is that what it's about?
Yeah, I think so. And in our ancestral context, everyone would be playing. So it's not just dads with the young, but it would be, usually it's a multi-age play group. You want to have multiple ages together, not the same age like we force in our schooling practices. That actually creates competition, because what are you going to learn from your playmates? Not much. You're going to just take risks, right? Too. So you want multiple aged groupings wherever you are and living that way, multi-generational households, schooling. And then that's going to increase cooperation, because the younger ones want to look up to the older ones and they want to learn, and the older ones like to show off to the younger and help them out. And that's our natural pedagogy for our species. But again, we've kind of undermined that too.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel like if the older children are helping with the younger ones and playing with the younger ones, are they also building a skill set for being parents later?
Yes, yeah, that's a good point. I think it's especially important for having experience with babies. In all over the world, in more traditional societies, 3-year-olds are carrying around babies. But we don't allow that here. We don't think they're capable. We kind of undermine their capacities generally. Kids at like 12 months are ready to help you fold laundry or something. And in traditional societies, they let them help, even though they know they'll make a mess of it. But there seems to be a sensitive period for wanting to be a helper in the community, right? It's not going to work to wait till they're adolescents and ask them to take out the garbage. So you got to follow those instincts of the baby. The baby has an inner compass that guides their growth, right? You can twist it if you harm them too much, if you traumatize them too much. So you want to get back to their trusting their instinct to move and learn and be a community member.
Wow. And it's also important for young adults to be able to tap into their nurturing instinct so that they're not derailed, I think, by a lot of the mainstream advice.
Yeah, and I think one thing to remember is when there's studies showing that when you hold a baby as a male, your testosterone level goes down, and when your testosterone is high, your empathy is not.
We always want to give the parents a lot of practical advice. This is the real science and it's very informative, but we can also translate that into practical application for parents. That's where the real world, becomes a challenge. But you touched on multiple age groups, and I think mother's helpers is what, you were describing a lot too. I think that mother's helper is one of the best ways to, I guess, confront the barriers and the challenges of early parenthood, because, that's what we used to have evolutionarily. What would you say to parents who are finding that they're not able to keep up with everything, all of the responsibility of running a household, perhaps having a job outside the home, and being able to give the new baby, or young child, as much nurturing as they need? How can we in the modern world use this model of the mother's helper to get to the level of nurturing that the child needs?
Well, ideally, you're living next to extended family members, right? I think actually the housing crisis might be an opportunity for families to join in and live together in the same house, and decrease expenses.
Yeah.
So that, yeah, somebody's always there, but you always want the kids in a multi-age play group. So you don't want it just with mom or just with dad. It doesn't develop the brain flexibility and the social flexibility that you want. I always recommend, it's hard to want less, to have for those first 3 years of that child's life in particular, someone stays home all the time.
Mhm.
And then offers the kind of the evolved nest practices as much as possible. And go back to work. I know this is really hard in our society, but we have to change things. The society's rules are all kind of crazy. So we got to
Yeah.
get out there and change them.
We have to change them. We have to be more supportive of mothers and fathers, parents in the early years. With society really has to step up and help. So if you are an auntie or an uncle, just know how important you are, a cousin. If you know a family with a young child, or a family that just had a baby, ask what you can do to help, be there, even if it's just to come help them with a meal, or just come hold the baby for a while. It's so needed for that family. What would you say if someone says to a parent, like, oh, their child is crying, oh, don't go to them because they just want attention? What would you say to that?
You can't spoil a baby. You can ruin a baby by not paying attention to them until they scream, scream, and scream. And then they learn that screaming works, right? They're just associations of what works with what. So you want to move in while they're signaling their needs with gestures. They start making a face or they start to wiggle or something. Then you want to move in and start patting or rocking them. You want to keep them in arms as much as possible. They need that for growth, for feeling calm, for vagus nerve development, stress response systems development. So if they start to cry, that means that they need something. And usually it's they haven't been touched enough or they're not being rocked. They expect to be carried around while you're gathering berries, right? It's the rock motion, not the pushing motion of a stroller. That's too steady and boring. They're expecting the rocking that helps them digest, that helps the brain development. And so provide the evolved nest as much as possible.
Yeah. So if they're signaling they need attention, then they need attention.
Yeah,
And
they're in pain.
And I think parents are afraid, like you said, for their child to develop more resistance, be more difficult later as a tantruming toddler. But what the research shows is it's actually the opposite, right? If they get what they need, they don't become as difficult later.
Yeah, well, the tantrum thing is just a Western notion. It's kind of the United States idea because we don't really care for children in the right way and we keep them distant. We just talk to them while they're in their carrier, right? Or the playpen or the crib, whatever. Oh, you're okay. And we're not touching them enough. We're not helping them feel secure and connected all the time. So terrible twos just don't exist in traditional societies. They're shocked when you say something about that, and they're shocked when you put children in their own room, in their own bed. Oh, they think that's torturous.
But
So
then we still hear from most parents that pediatricians are still telling parents to do that, to get them in their own bed, to leave them to cry, to do the sleep training.
they're not paying attention to the long-term effects on the child. They're looking at poor research, poorly reported, poorly designed, and done with people who have vested interests in sleep training, like sleep training clinic people. So anything that violates the evolved nest, you must question it and look for the long-term effects showing that that violation doesn't matter. There are no such studies, right? Because they cannot show that there's no harm done.
Wow. And they can show a lot of evidence that harm is done. So, what about the cortisol studies that they have done on infants undergoing the cry it out sleep training experience?
Yeah, this is Wendy Middlemiss, is the first author. She took cortisol uh, samples from babies, specifically as when they stopped crying, and parents thought, "Oh, everything's good." No, cortisol levels were still high, right? Inflammation is still going. The baby just learned to shut up.
Yes. And that's proof of what you just said. They learn to stop crying because they can't keep expending that much energy forever. And so they shut down, like you've been explaining. And there's scientific evidence of everything that she's saying. I'm just putting that out there. There is scientific evidence of everything. All of your positions on not crying it out, not leaving babies alone for extended periods of times with institutional caregivers. So I know that a lot of your posts on those issues on Kindred Media, for example, which we'll also link, they had huge responses when they were first published. Like I know one was like 3 million views. Another one that you and I wrote together was, I think, over 1 million views just on Cry It Out. Parents are, it's definitely resonating, right, with
Yeah,
something deep inside them.
yeah, yeah. It's really a shame that we have all this misinformation, but usually you follow the money. That's where,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yes, I wish someone had told me that as a new parent right off the bat. Had to learn the hard way. And so we'll link a lot of those resources for parents, but just know that the Cry It Out sleep training is also not necessary if you do address the security issues, high nurturing. When I coached parents, I mean, if you do address those and raise the baby in the way that Darcia is describing, then you later have it a lot easier. When I was coaching parents who had gone through Cry It Out and now wanted to, it actually makes them worse before, usually makes them more upset and cry more and sleep less, and makes it more difficult for them to get to sleep after they've done that because they are so traumatized and they have to get back to feeling secure. And I really appreciate your work so much in the field of moral development.
And again, it's transdisciplinary. It's, the holism of being a human being is all of these things. All the disciplines are taking a little piece of it. So you can't get stuck in one or you'll miss the big picture.
Yes. And when you do put that big picture together and you see that all of these different areas of science are saying the same thing through different lenses, then you know there is a right path,
Yeah.
right? So, well, thank you so much for being with us and for sharing your knowledge and sharing the way to the evolved nest and parenting with our instincts and giving babies what they truly, really need. Just there's mountains of papers and books and films, and you're just very prolific. So thank you for everything you've done for the world. You're an allo parent to the world, I like to say. Allo parent is a scientific word for helping the mother, helping the parents, right?
Yeah, other nurturer, a
Yeah.
nurturer. Yeah.
Is
Thank you
there
so much.
is there anything that's on your heart or top of mind that you want to share that I didn't ask you about?
One thing that comes to mind is there's a lot of attention to the anxiety in the adolescent years right now.
Yes, and
College
suicide
years.
rates are high, very high.
Yes, they're very high. And one thing that's not being addressed or attended to is how that starts in babyhood. And it starts with sleep training, it starts with abandonment of nurturing needs, and then it emerges later. I've heard from parents who said, I sleep trained my child, and now I see an adolescent, she has trouble with getting along with others and so on. And there are animal studies where they separate the offspring from the mother like for 1 hour a day after birth for a week or something. And then in adolescence, they have trouble. They can't get along. So I think we are again, we have to look at the big picture in terms of timeline of lifespan, not just, oh, the baby went to sleep, everything's fine. And look, there's no problem the next day. We have to think of the lifespan effects of how we treat our children.
Yes, and then like you said, these deficits in the nurturing or what you call undercare in your books it's showing up later. It's showing up later in childhood and it's showing up especially in adolescence and then in relationships into adulthood. We have all these attachment disorders. Is that also mapped back to the baby's neglect or undercare?
Yeah. So I would also like to say that just to emphasize, boys need more of the nest. They mature more slowly. They have less built-in resilience. And if they're not nurtured to like 7 years old in this kind of nestedness, especially, they're going to have all sorts of other problems like ADHD and aggression and schizophrenia and there's a whole list. Alan Shore has pointed this out. And so we have to remember, if you've had a girl first as a child, an offspring, and then you have a boy, you think, what's wrong with this boy? He's so clingy. That's because he's still developing. So you need to be more responsive to the boy because the girls have, can manage.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. That's so important because for in our society we think of boys as just tougher, and so we expect them to be tough right out of the womb. It's not true.
Yeah, and now you're then seeding the self-protectionist morality, the morality of domination, and the way a worldview of domination is what you're seeding when you don't nurture boys adequately throughout those first years.
And I love also the research that you talk about that I've heard you speak to about the toddlers who have been really well nurtured. So in the hunter-gatherer societies or indigenous people that you've studied, when they have been really well nurtured as babies, they're more adventurous and more brave and stronger and resilient, all the things that parents want, but they're more so that way if they had the nurturing, right?
That's right. You're actually it's an illusion to think that you're creating a baby's independence. That's not, they might be detached, emotionally detached from the world, but they're never going to feel safe and secure and down deep. They're always going to rely on something outside of themselves to make them feel safe, because you undermine the inner compass, the inner guide, right? Which is all about security, so you can go anywhere. And so, yeah, in the nested communities, everyone feels confident. They live on the earth. Earth is a safe place. I can find my way. I can find food. I can find, friendships. I can find whatever I need when the time comes.
True confidence, which is so different from a detached confidence. We want them to be strong and secure and confident and
Mhm.
not have all these wounds that go way back, right?
Right. Yeah, and then you're governed by your wounds because you don't have free will then because it's all the memory that's in your body that's
And would
guiding how you
you
behave.
yes. And would you say that is one of the reasons for addiction as well? Like there's a void inside that people are trying to fill?
Yes, Jaak Panksepp pointed out that we evolved to be addicted to people. And
Mm.
when that doesn't happen, when you don't get all the systems developed correctly and so that you feel happy and enhanced by being with others, you're going to find something.
So we're supposed to be addicted to other people. We're supposed to be attached. We're supposed to be in relationship. But what would you say to some of perhaps your colleagues in psychology who would say, oh, that's codependent, right? You're not supposed to be too attached. What do you
Uh,
say?
that's the Western detachment orientation. That's the left brain having taken over Western culture. Because we've undermined early development, the right hemisphere doesn't develop properly, which is all the social and emotional intelligence and flexibility and awareness of dynamism and going with the flow. That's all right hemisphere directed, at least initially. And so when we don't provide the evolved nest, or you don't get a lot of playing done later in life because you can regrow your right hemisphere that way. You're going to be in this left brain kind of detached ivory tower thinking. You think, oh yeah, my ideas are perfect, and I just impose them on the world, and you don't know that they're not working, right? The life ways. So the codependency thing is just a left brain thing. It's not involved, right? It's separated.
Yes. Yes. And as you mentioned, Alan Shore has done so much incredible research and putting together also the different disciplines and how that right brain growth spurt happens in the early years. But I didn't know that you could help to regrow your whatever you missed in the early years through play. That's amazing.
Yeah, at least some of it. I'm not sure you
Some
can
of it.
fix I don't know if you can fix your immune system because that's also established then and various things, but your ability to your social and emotional intelligence and your sense of transcendence to be able to leave your own self and feel connected to oneness. That's all right hemisphere stuff.
Yes, and also being able to take perspectives of others, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it is Earth Week this week, Darcia, and I know that this is something close to your heart. And I wanted to just open it up and ask you, what would you like to share in terms of your vision for the kind of Earth and the kind of society that we should have, and how that maps back to how we raise our children?
Well, one of the aspects of the evolved nest is nature immersion and connection. So we co-evolved with the natural world. So we are oriented to connecting to the animals, the plants, the winds, the waterways. And that's something that when you live in a city or inside four walls, you spend most of your time inside. I guess a few years ago, there was a study that asked Americans how long they spent outside, and the average amount spent outside per year was 24 hours.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah, so that's like running from your house to your car every
Every
day.
day. Yeah, that's about it.
So anyway, that is abnormal for our species.
Normal, not how
And
we evolved to be.
no, right. And we are now, because we're so detached from nature, from our lack of immersion and connection, we are destroying the planet. So we need to learn from the animals and the plants how to live well, how to live in a way that's responsible and respectful, because that's what our ancestors did. We kind of just forgot about it because we got less experience with nature. So I think it's vital to provide the evolved nest in its fullest sense. And the last component of the 9 is restoring healing practices, regular healing practices for when we get out of balance, for when we forget our relational responsibilities, for when we feel mentally or physically unwell. Healing practices bring us back into relationship. And that relationship includes then all our relations, all the animals and plants, waterways, mountains, air, and so that we uh, tamp down our big ego because we have to all build a big ego to get through this traumatizing society. We need to start to diminish it, which is what our ancestral context they did. They didn't allow big egos, and they didn't need to have one because your needs are met, and everyone loves you. And not everyone loves you, but everyone's there to be supportive of one another.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Darcia. I appreciate you so much, and your work is just so informative for parents who are getting conflicting information. There is a guidepost. There are best practices, and they are available. So we'll help them with pointing them in the right direction to check out your books and your films and your nonprofit initiative, The Evolved Nest at Kindred World. So we'll put all that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Darcia, for being with us.
Thank you so much, Angela, for having me. It was a great pleasure.